everyone, Pineaaronapple here with 2008's Iron Man, the first MCU movie. Because apparently I am legally obligated to talk about the movies before I get to the current Disney Plus shows. So why don't we start now? All things considered, even if he was a big player in the comics for a while, I don't think Iron Man was as in the eye of the general populace, like to the degree of the Fantastic Four or the Hulk. Well, God forbid you compare him to Keaton's Batman. But over the years, Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., has become a character powerhouse, especially with the fame of the MCU. So, before we get into the 2-hour and 6-minute movie itself, let's talk about the characters. First is obviously Iron Man himself, Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. Now, Tony isn't my favourite character in the MCU, but especially in this film, the characterization given to him is honestly fantastic. He starts the film as an arrogant yet charming playboy of a scientist. He clearly is very smart, but his personality is clearly defined as less than desirable. His turn through the film also gives a great connection to the audience. He keeps his smarts and wit, but instead of using them to create weapons, he develops a new worldview once he is kidnapped. This explains why he is such a renowned character, and why his impact on future movies is so prominent. He clearly has flaws and vices that are explored, a demon in a bottle anyone, but he has the smarts, heart and charisma to be the hero of the film, culminating in the great final line of the movie. Tony's sort of love interest of the film is Goop Queen herself, Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts. She is not my cup of tea in really any of these movies. Well, neither is Gwyneth Paltrow, to be honest, but she pops in and out to have a comedic and romantic tension with Tony. She has a little agency by the end, helping Coulson, but that just amounts to her being a damsel for Tony to save as he fights the villain. Although she does land the final blow technically, so she wasn't completely wasted. So nothing too terrible with her character, but I feel she could have had more to do at the very least. Then is Rhodey, played by Terrence Howard, in his one and only MCU film. Rhodey is decent in this movie, but I never felt the connection between Terrence Howard and Robert Downey Jr. was as strong as his and Don Cheadle's, who replaced him in the role. Here he is fine. He has more agency than Pepper, but doesn't do much to interact with any of the other characters, and his biggest actions are the 2 times he stops the government shooting Tony down. Not so much used in this movie compared to the sequel, Happy Hogan is also there, played by the film's director Jon Favreau. A fine character later on, but I'll be honest, I don't even remember if he has a line in this movie. Our villain for the film is Obadiah Stane, played by Jeff Bridges. I'll be honest, I do have a problem or two with how the character is written, but Jeff Bridges acts in the role fantastically. The aforementioned problems are probably due to the character's evilness. It's a little jarring how suddenly he seems to just not give a shit. He seemed to have a long-standing and deep connection with Tony, like an uncle. So him in quick succession having Tony kidnapped, expecting him to be killed, and then later on straight up attempting to murder Pepper, it feels like he needed to be written either more explicitly, evil for a prominent and long amount of time, or with further subtext for him to justify this, rather than money. Which I suppose could be a decent motivation, but here it just seems strange for the position the character's in. If it were written better, it would be great, but as it is, I just commend Bridges on his performance. Also, Coulson is here, who, until the climax, is basically a joke that everyone ignores, and then kind of becomes that at the end. Either way, Clark Gregg was fine here. Sean Tobe played Ho Yinsen, who was pretty great. He represented Tony's emotional arc, a sympathetic and endearing character who helps him escape his captivity in exchange for his life. Probably one of the best characters of the film. So now let's get to the basic story of the film. Tech Marvel, get it? Tony Stark is kidnapped by terrorists known as the Ten Rings, who employ him to build them copies of his weapons of mass destruction. He is helped to escape by Hogan, who dies in the process, and is inspired to stop making weapons and actually help people. To the grief of basically everyone he knows, including one Obadiah Stane, who was in league with the terrorists because evil. He betrays the terrorists and steals Tony's original suit, the Ironmonger, that looks pretty great by the way. To power the suit, Stane needs the power source that Tony created to keep his heart shrapnel-free, after the beating that it took when he was kidnapped. Eventually, Tony creates the Iron Man suit and saves people from the Ten Rings. Obadiah steals the reactor from Tony's heart and uses it to power his upgraded version of the Ironmonger suit, once he figures out that Pepper leaked his involvement to the Ten Rings to Coulson, who had been sniffing around in the whole movie. Rhodey helps Tony suit up, and with help from Pepper, ends up killing Stane after a long and honestly decent-looking battle. The movie ends with Tony having a press conference to speak about Stane and the Iron Man. Coulson wants it under wraps and gives him a pretty good alibi, but in the best line of the movie, and a badass moment in general, Tony drops all pretense at the conference and states,
"I am Iron Man."
Yeah, that's epic. Now, of course, this would have a lot of consequences down the line, like having to make an Eternals movie, but here it's just a really well done last line of dialogue. Speaking about music, there is a decent amount of music in the film. Nothing as banging as the Armored Adventures opening, but the OST was pretty well done, and all of the music fit the scenes pretty well. There were also insert songs, such as the very beginning, with the obvious Back in Black usage. Songs like that also fitting very well, with not only the characters, but the tone of the film. Now we should probably talk about the CGI. Honestly, there were problems here and there I had, but for the most part, the CGI was actually pretty good, even to today's standards. The suits, both the Iron Man and the Ironmonger, look pretty good, and in the final fight I did see a few problems, but honestly I did love the CGI on them. There isn't anything worse in an action movie like this than the CGI looking terrible, but honestly, I was impressed. Talking about direction now, as I mentioned earlier, this was done by Jon Favreau, and I know him better as an actor than a director. Here, there wasn't anything amazing or particularly revolutionary, but there weren't any shots or specific line reads that outright took me out of it. I thought everything in his department was competently done. So now that we've covered all our bases, let's wrap up the review. Iron Man was better than I remembered it. It's been a long while since I'd seen the first MCU movie, and the last time I saw it was on a Bender marathon, so I don't remember it. The characters were great, better than I remember, but some were a little flat. More fleshed out in future movies, but that is the detriment of this film. I don't think they should have had to have been fleshed out in future movies to be interesting. The antagonist was good, and I didn't really find myself hating or being perturbed by anything. I give Iron Man 2008, the first MCU movie, a very good 8 out of 10.
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.